So going back to some of what Sarah had to say about being kind of new to the game and being an early kind of whistleblower, new and not sure if she really belongs. We have this panel coming up with early career whistleblower attorneys who will talk about what it's like to enter the field and learn from their mentors. So please join us with our wonderful early career whistleblower attorneys moderated by Matthew Beddingfield for our panel, Building on Their Legacy.
Hello, how's everyone doing? My name is Matthew Beddingfield. I'm a senior associate with Zerby Miller Fingret Frank and Jadov here in Washington, D.C. Joining me today, we have David Lieberman, who's a member at the Whistleblower Law Collaborative, as well as Kayla Swijovic. And Kayla, you're gonna have to let me know if I pronounced that correctly. She's the Public Interest Law Fellow at Kohn and Colapinto here in Washington, D.C. So excited for this conversation because I think it's a very important one. David, Kayla, and myself are all young attorneys in the field. And what we're going to be talking about today is how young attorneys such as ourselves got into this space, how we seek out mentors and lean on those mentors, and also our vision for the future in terms of whistleblower law and representing some of the brave whistleblowers that we just heard from in the last panel. So welcome everyone. I wanted to start out by letting David and Kayla give their own introductions. So Kayla, why don't we start with you and why don't you tell our guests today who you are and what led you to this space?
Sure. Thanks, Matthew. You did great with my name, by the way. Better than most. Thank you for moderating, and thank you obviously to Siri and everyone at NWC for putting this on, and everyone who's tuning in. We're happy to have you, and I'm excited to jump in. I think this is going to be a fun conversation. So my name is Kayla Swijovic. I am, as Matthew said, the Public Interest Law Fellow at Kohn and Colapinto in Washington, D.C. So my work focuses primarily on providing direct representation to individual whistleblowers as they sort of navigate the administrative, civil, and sometimes criminal proceedings that can stem from their disclosures and them coming forward with their allegations. And before joining KKC, I was clerking for a judge at the DC Superior Court. And before that, I was in law school at Georgetown. So I am very early in my career. And before I started at KKC, I knew absolutely nothing about whistleblower law. But I've always been interested in the intersections between criminal law and civil rights. And I thought that whistleblower law sounded like a really interesting and unique place where those two fields sort of overlap. So I was excited about starting my legal career here in this field. And now I get to learn directly from the folks who literally wrote the book on it. I keep the partners at my firm, I keep their handbook next to my desk at all times. And I get to talk to these brave whistleblowers every single day and hear their stories. And my job wouldn't exist without them. So I'm grateful to be here and happy to be carrying on this type of work with my other colleagues on this panel.
Thank you so much, Kayla. And I think I actually see the book you're referencing right across my desk here. So
yep.
Thank you
Everyone's
so much.
got it. I've even had some whistleblowers who I've talked to who pull it out during our intake call and say, I've read this book and it helped me come forward. So it's a great resource.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to hearing some of your commentary today. David, we're on to you.
Hi, Matt and Kayla. Glad to be here, and to Siri and everyone at NWC. So a little bit about myself. I have had a few jobs in the legal career. I clerked for a year, then I spent a year working for the Massachusetts Attorney General. I'm in Massachusetts. I was a criminal prosecutor, mostly prosecuting environmental crimes. Worked at a law firm at 2 civil law firms, doing sort of general civil litigation with actually a little bit of, government enforcement defense. And then at one of these, they were helping to litigate a very large False Claims Act case that actually continues to this day. And many of these don't litigate, but when they do, they often require a lot of attorneys. And so as a junior attorney, I was one of the first really substantive, exciting projects I got on it. I started on it. I loved the work. I loved the law we can talk about it, but the law, one of the fascinating things about this is how quickly you get into fascinating and undecided areas of the law. All the while getting to be doing some of the stuff I really liked, which was working as the government and prosecuting wrongdoers, And so it was just my favorite thing to do. And as the case went on, I started to think about how I could do it more. And so I went looking for people who did this exclusively. And I work with five other lawyers we're a firm called Whistleblower Law Collaborative. All of us have had some government prosecutorial experience. We prosecute under all whistleblower programs, SEC, CFTC, a little bit of NHTSA, but mostly what we do is what most whistleblower attorneys do, I think, and work under the False Claims Act, and do a lot of healthcare, a lot of contracting, a lot of defense work, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Excellent. Thanks so much for being with us, David. And just very quickly, some background on me. I like to call myself a recovering journalist. I used to write for Bloomberg. Tax was my beat. Ended up going to a different firm before I came here. But during my time at Bloomberg, Dean Zerbe was one of my primary sources. Dean worked for Senator Grassley, who's called the godfather of whistleblowers by many, and helped to draft the law that helped to create the IRS whistleblower office and the program therein. Section 7623B in the Internal Revenue Code. So I'll be talking about him later because he's one of my mentors, but kind of wanted to segue from there into our first topic, which is mentorship. And Kayla, why don't we go to you first? And my question is, why do you think mentorship is so important for young attorneys, just in general? And then we can talk specifically about whistleblower law, because we're sort of in a niche field here.
Right. I mean, I think in general, obviously professional and personal development, it's important to have mentors who, know the ropes. They know how to navigate these complicated situations that we find ourselves in as young attorneys, and they know how to make sure that you are balancing, work and personal life and all of that important stuff. But I think especially in this field, because it can be kind of a misunderstood field. There are obviously a lot of, negative stereotypes surrounding whistleblowers that I think we're all trying to dismantle. And I think having mentors that understand how we got to that place and why we got to that place and how we can kind of undo those things is really important. I also have noticed that most organizations and firms that I've seen that do this type of work tend to be very small. I mean, as David said, he's working with a very small group. We have only a handful of attorneys at our firm as well. They all tend to be kind of small, intimate settings like that. And I think having mentors in those settings is especially important. Because you are being trusted with a lot of substantive work in those settings. And so having a support system, both professionally and personally, is just really important.
Thank you so much. David, what about you? Why do you think being a young attorney and having a mentor is so important in this type of field?
First of all, I think having a mentor is a mistake. You should have several mentors who each bring you something different, and you talk about different things. Or not, or you talk about the same things. But I think a lot of what Kayla said, I would add a couple of things. One is, I think this is true of the entire industry, of the whole legal field. This is a trade, right? So law school, while a lot of people go to law school because it's what smart people are supposed to do, or I don't know, it's pre-politician, whatever you think it is, it's a trade school. You go there to learn how to do this thing, and 3 years in, you don't know anything about practicing law. Literally, like you don't know anything about how to practice law. And that is taught to you by people who know what they're doing. And when I was at large firms, they had very formalized, structured mentorship programs, which had pluses and minuses. But there was always someone around who generally done the thing you're trying to do, and there was someone to talk to. It's a lot harder. As Kayla said, most of what we do now is done by niche practitioners. And it is so there is much less likelihood there will be someone right near you whose job it is to tell you how to do that. Even more so, I think, in particularly the sealed case practice, the False Claims Act, and some of the other programs, although it is much harder to learn the right way to do a disclosure statement, or to present your evidence to the government, because there are no cases that analyze how it was done. A lot of this stuff is under seal. And then a lot of it is highly relationship focused. It's, when do you check with the government? How do you read what the government's saying to you about what they mean about their case? How do you get a sense for where the government's strong? That's all very subtle stuff that it's just, I would venture to say, is not in any book anywhere. And the way you learn it is by doing it, but also by talking to people who know how to do it. I mean, that's why I would say, working as a whistleblower, and I was a whistleblower attorney, working with people who are comfortable with what they're doing is very, very important.
Thanks so much, David. I liked several things that you just said. Going back to the law school comments and at graduation, I remember having that distinct feeling where I'm like, do I know what I'm doing here? Even in the bar. So that's a whole nother panel that the three of us will have to put on someday.
I remember at the end of civil procedure, I was like, I just did a semester of civil procedure. If you told me to sue someone today, I'd have no idea how to do it.
Yes, no, exactly. So, I also liked your comment about having several mentors for a variety of reasons. But, myself, I have several mentors just within our firm. Eric Hilton, who works at our firm, he's our director of compliance. He was the deputy chief of IRS CI and worked heavily with money laundering issues. David, you had mentioned your firm. You work with a variety of whistleblower programs, and that can be intimidating, knowing where to file, how to file. Some programs don't have a specific vehicle for filing, talking about FinCEN. So I'll lean on him for some issues. I'll lean on Dean for others, or Steve Miller in the office next to me, former commissioner of the IRS, for if it's a very specific tax issue that I'm trying to articulate clearly. So that's a very good comment. And, but what's difficult sometimes is finding the right mentor, one, let alone two or three. So Kayla, let's kick it back to you. And I want to hear from you about how you have found mentors in your practice, and how do you pick the right ones, and how do you kind of form a relationship with them, year to year?
Sure. I mean, I think the first place to look is obviously where you're interning or working, or, your immediate surroundings are a good place to start, but there's no right or wrong place to find a mentor. I think you can find a mentor anywhere. And like David said, there are different kinds of mentors that you can find. I one time had my blue book with me on an airplane, which is a legal citation book, working on something for law school. And the person next to me was a lawyer, recognized the book, and we started talking, and I left that airplane with a business card. There's absolutely no wrong place to find a mentor. And I think it's just about persistence and awareness of who's around you and who might have something interesting to share. So I think just being open-minded about where you might be able to find people with interesting, overlaps and interests with you is a big part of it. And I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it. I think every professional is going to react to different approaches differently. Some people might be open to receiving a cold email or a cold LinkedIn message, and others might not be so happy with that. So I think it's just about trial and error and persistence and open-mindedness to where and when and who you might come across.
Exactly right. And David, what about you? Where have you sought out your mentors?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this as kind of speaking. Certainly, every job I've had, there is still one or two people I regularly lean on. And then there are a few people I've met through things like, through professional associations, things like Taxpayers Against Fraud is a whistleblower professional association, the Boston Bar Association, there are those. One thing I would add is when I was younger than I am now, I was very hesitant to ask people to mentor me because it seemed like a one-sided relationship and such a burden to ask of someone. And one of the things that really helped me was I actually, one of my firms, we did mentorship for law students, and being on the other side of that and realizing how rewarding it is to be asked about your practice and asked to give advice made me much more comfortable asking others for advice, because it is one of the great joys of my practice when I can help younger attorneys. And it's sort of, there's a way to look at it as somewhat selfish to deny that to others who want to help me.
I love that. And, you had mentioned TAF, Taxpayers Against Fraud, fantastic group. Can you talk a little bit, and we'll stick with you for this one, David, about the importance of networking? I think some people think the only place for networking really is getting the job. And once you got it, you're good. You just have to do what the job requires. Can you talk a little bit about, especially for younger attorneys, developing that network, not only with individuals, but with associations and groups like TAF?
So a lot of my perspective of this comes from like having started at a large firm. At large, one of the values of large firms is a lot of people who do a lot of different things, and it is part of their job. A corporate attorney answers a corporate law question from some litigator who has no business asking. Like, that is just something that is done at those firms. And like I said, this is a trade. You have to be able to rely on other people to help you. And when you are at a smaller firm, you have to recreate that in some way. And so one of the huge values of those associations is to recreate for each person basically a network of other attorneys that can answer the kind of random legal questions that come up. And so a large part, when I get new questions, like one of the first things I will do is ask people, I'm somewhat shy, so I start with people I know at Taxpayers Against Fraud. For example, here's a case that has come up in a district, like it could be filed in different districts, none of which I'm super familiar with. I am going to call people I know and ask about those districts and the assistant U.S. attorneys in those districts. That is vital to do. Anytime a new legal issue comes up that I am not 100% familiar with, I will call people, start with my firm, but I will call friends and colleagues at other firms to see who's done that before.
Thank you so much. And Kayla, I'm going to go to you for this one. I loved your little anecdote about finding a mentor on the plane, because I love that type of serendipity, I guess. When you are working with mentors and trying to lean on them, as David said, what kind of things are you asking them? I mean, do you feel it a burden to lean on your mentors? And do you see yourself as a mentor, further in your career?
Absolutely. That is something I definitely still struggle with, is trying not to think of it as a burden. The way that David described it is hard to make sure that you keep in touch with people who you've worked with in the past. It's so easy to let those relationships slip by and slip out of your hands. It's so easy. So making sure that doesn't happen is difficult when you're kind of seeing it as a burden, especially when you are, like me, very early in your career, and it's hard not to think, well, what do I have to offer in return? I feel like I'm not ready to be a mentor yet. But even as early as I am in my career, I have people who are in law school or starting law school who reach out to me for help. And just like David said, that is so rewarding to me. And so trying to, make sure to keep that in mind. And I recently had one of my favorite mentors from a previous job actually reach out to me to ask if I could be a reference for him for a mentorship program, because he had mentored me and wanted my, input on the value of his mentorship. So that stuff just always comes around, and it is mutually beneficial, even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes. So just making sure that you keep those relationships alive. And even if it is a little bit selfish, it will benefit me, but it will also benefit you. And that's just how this field works. And that's just kind of how life works. So allowing that to be a little bit a part of it is a helpful thing to remember.
Yeah, and it will benefit your clients, the whistleblowers that we're working so hard to
Exactly.
represent in a good way. David, you had mentioned this being a trade, which is so true, and having multiple mentors. I can think of my days at Bloomberg and a specific editor that I still lean on. So much of our field is writing, and at least for me, a lot of what I do is draft claims for the IRS whistleblower program. Another topic we can probably go on and on about at a different panel, but we draft narratives that explain the whistleblower situation and the non-compliance that they're alleging. So, if I'm trying to frame things in a certain way, or if I'm even struggling with a sentence, sometimes I lean on different people. But the field that we're in is very unique, and at times there's a lot at stake. People's lives are in danger at times, their careers, their families. I can distinctly remember one time early in my time here at this firm, dealing with an international client who had fears for their safety, the safety of their family. So for attorneys that are younger and first entering the field, or even older attorneys that are first entering the field, you could run into what some people call imposter syndrome. I think a lot of attorneys deal with that in general, but I know I did in this specific field, where you're dealing with someone's livelihood, and they're coming forward with allegations of fraud or non-compliance or whatever it is, and they're putting their livelihood in your hands in a lot of cases. So, David, let's go to you for this one. How do you define imposter syndrome? Is it something that you experienced when you first entered the field?
Oh, yeah. I mean, did I experience it last week? Yes. Yes, of course. And I think that, and I will say that, I worked at two firms that like to describe what they did as bet the company litigation. And I never did anything nearly as important to anybody until the very first case I had, when someone came forward, someone came to talk to us and said, I couldn't stand what this employer was doing. I quit my job. We need to make it stop. And suddenly someone's future career prospects, not to mention the health of a bunch of patients, was at stake. That is a time, I mean, that is, and suddenly things become very important. You realize how important what you do is. And this is where I really lean on, like, having excellent partners that you trust, and my broader network of colleagues. But this is where, like, really having partners that know what they're doing. So one of my partners was the former head of the civil division at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Another was, all of them have worked as prosecutors. Like, being able to talk those things through with them is so helpful. Being able to feel like we're a team working on cases is so helpful. And the other thing, I actually wanted to respond to something you said, Matt. Like, I feel pretty comfortable with my knowledge of the law and the practice at this point. And the thing that always keeps me up is the storytelling part, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're telling someone's story. How is this argument? How is this fact? How is this angle going to be received? That is the thing I worry about. And so that's the reason that, when I go to pull my partners aside, it's not so much like, what's the right way to do this, or what's the law about this? But it's like, how can I best explain to someone how important this fraud is? Those are the things that I really worry about.
And Kayla, we've thrown around some of the people that we work with that are esteemed folks. Partners at your firm worked at one of the largest IRS whistleblower cases. They literally wrote the book on the field. When you are working with people like that, have you experienced a sense of, I maybe am not able to speak up in this situation, which is somewhat ironic in our field now that I'm saying it out loud. You're wanting to speak up and you feel like you can't. Even as welcoming as our bosses can be, sometimes it's intimidating. What have your experiences been with imposter syndrome, and having your voice heard in an adequate way.
Right. I mean, I absolutely experience imposter syndrome. I can be completely honest about that. I mean, as early in my career as I am, and being a woman also in a male-dominated field, that contributes. And I don't think any of my imposter syndrome is, due to the people I work with at all. They are wonderful. And I think a big part of overcoming imposter syndrome is making sure that you are surrounding yourself with people who value your contribution to the field. And I absolutely have the privilege of that at KKC. And I think I really like what you both were talking about as far as storytelling and communication being such a key part of what we do. And I think oddly, that has actually helped me overcome my imposter syndrome in some ways, because even on days where my imposter syndrome is very strong and I'm feeling, very not qualified to be doing some of the things that I'm doing, I remember that it is just about communication, and it is just about being a human and listening to another human. And I think I'm qualified as a human to do that. So on days where I am feeling that very strongly, and all I feel like I have to offer is just a listening ear, that's so valuable in what we do. And if that's all I have to offer that day, that's what I'll do that day. And that is so valuable in this field and in what we do, just listening, and being a human listening to another human and making sure that their story is communicated accurately and authentically. So that has actually helped a little bit for me.
Great. And, myself, coming into this job, I certainly felt it as well. Despite everyone being so welcoming and offering to help whenever I needed it. But I can distinctly remember one project. It was an amicus brief that we were writing, and I was reviewing a draft. And really the comments that I had put throughout the draft were grammatical fixes, formatting fixes, maybe a minor comment here and there. And the comment I got from someone who's now my mentor was, we're not paying you to do these types of things. We're paying you for, your talent and your brains. And, you need to speak up, give more comments. What is it about what we're saying that is good or bad? And so he really put me out of my comfort zone at that time and pushed me to, be at the table and have a voice, which I really appreciated. And, I think, this panel is called Building on Their Legacy. We're building on someone else's legacy, but someday we're going to have to pass it on to someone else. So, the people that are tuning in today, they might be practicing attorneys. They might also be whistleblowers. And I think just having experienced interacting with a variety of whistleblower clients, I think they also feel imposter syndrome at times as well. Am I doing the right thing? Am I worthy of coming forward and telling my story? Is this even a big deal? I hear that one a lot. I'm not sure if what I'm telling you is good or bad or wrong or right. So they find themselves questioning things. And I think a part of that is just the position they're putting themselves in, the vulnerable position they're putting themselves in. So let's kind of flip the imposter syndrome on whistleblowers. And David, why don't you talk a little bit about how you get your clients over that hump and help them realize that, yes, what they're doing is valuable, and we're here to help you, cross the finish line.
Yeah, with apologies, I'm going to sort of answer that question because you raising this question made me think of something.
Sure.
One of the other founding partners is a guy named Bob Thomas, and let me just say as a background, there is whistleblower law, there's the False Claims Act, there's the SEC program, but particularly with with all of them, the fraud is going to be about something else, and it's going to be about some incredibly complicated regulatory or contractual system. And the fact is that you, the lawyer, are probably not an expert in that other thing. Even the ones you do quite a bit, right? Every hospice is slightly different than home healthcare. They're all it's always a new world. And in a lot of areas of law, they encourage you to become so niche. it is a professional danger to admit you don't know something. And so when I came to my firm, and that I think is a lot of what feeds into imposter syndrome, is this inability to show that kind of weakness, that there's something you don't know. At least it was for me. And with the first couple of intake client interviews that I did with my partner, Bob, he had this amazing confidence that he knew he's a very, very, very good whistleblower lawyer, but he knows that he probably doesn't know this particular world that the fraud is happening. And he's very honest with the client that, like, you are going to know more about this contracting system than we do. And you are going to be the expert, at least as we learn about it. And you're going to teach us. And that kind of humility made me feel more confident about being humble and learning the things I need to learn about that area of law and the other areas of law that I need to learn. And so I think in a general sense, that made me feel much more comfortable to grow at my firm. But I will also say, to answer more specifically your question, that kind of humility to whistleblowers, that they are almost certainly the expert in the regulatory or contractual area that they operate in, and we're merely there to learn about what they do and then help present what they know to be wrong to the relevant authorities. I think that attitude, in my experience, has helped clients feel like I'm not there to tell them whether something's right or wrong. They know that, right? I don't know their industry. I don't know their fraud. If they think something's wrong, they are almost certainly right. It is my job to help take that knowledge and those facts and present them to the people who need to hear them.
Yeah, I love that take on the question, David, because one of the initial things that I tell my clients is, I'm not a tax attorney. I am a whistleblower attorney. And so you and I are going to need to be partners in getting this claim across the finish line. We do have people who have LLMs at our firm, and we have CPAs at our firm that help me navigate through the weeds. But I think it's so important to be vulnerable with the client and say, I know how to get this claim across the finish line and represent you in the best way possible in front of the government, whatever program it is.
Right.
But I always tell them, the first drafts that they're reviewing of our narratives, I more than likely am going to misstate something. You need to be there to correct me. You need to take the red pen to it and mark it up. I'll make sure it's presented correctly, but you need to make sure it's presented accurately. So Kayla, talk to us a little bit about how you interact with your clients and kind of help them over the hump of their imposter syndrome that they might be facing.
Yeah, I really like the way that you described it as well, David. I think the client is absolutely the expert in 99.9% of these situations. They're coming to us with something and is such a specific medical practice that I know nothing about. And so not only is that a really interesting experience for us as the attorneys, is such a unique experience to be able to learn about all these different fields that normally we never would have come across, or we would have just sent it off to an expert in a bigger firm, and we get to learn about that, which is really neat. But not only are they the expert in the field that they are working in, but they're the expert of the facts at the beginning. A lot of my job recently has been the initial intake interviews with whistleblowers. And at that point, I don't know what facts are relevant. No one knows what facts are going to be relevant at that point. So when I can tell someone's starting to get a little unsure and they're worried they're talking too much or going too into detail about something that might not be important, I just make sure to remind them, neither of us know what facts are important. Right now, I just want to talk. I'd rather we talk over the time of our meeting and me have too much detail that I don't end up needing to use versus us trying to, cut it short and me walking away with not enough detail. So neither of us know what's relevant. Neither of us know, what this is going to look like, where we're going to take this, how this is going to look at the end of it. So let's just chat like human beings and just get that story out there on a very conversational level. And then we'll figure out, the nitty gritty later on.
I love that answer, Caleb. So we are the next generation of whistleblower attorneys, being the young guns, as they say. what do you guys think that we are specifically bringing to the table that will help our field move forward and be even more powerful in this fight against fraud than the last generation? And all credit to them, all credit to the previous attorneys or our mentors or whoever. But David, let's start with you. What types of skills or our outlook on things, what's so important about what we bring to the table?
Yeah, so I think there are two things I would point out. One is sort of an extension of our last conversation. The whistleblower laws, to the extent they change, but to the extent they're similar, and to the extent we are on the path that were blazed by our colleagues and our mentors, they may be similar, but the fraud is evolving constantly, and it's evolving constantly, sometimes in reaction to new developments in the world or the law. So the PPP program is a major area of fraud. Nobody knows anything about it because it didn't exist 3 years ago. The explosion of telehealth is a major area of fraud because nobody, it wasn't used as much 3 years ago. Genetic testing these are areas that we are looking at, but to get good at doing those cases, it needs someone with energy and humility to learn and an excitement for that. And that's what younger lawyers, I think, bring. Similarly, we've sort of suggested or outright said that the whistleblower firms that are leading right now are by and large smaller shops. And there was a time, so when I went to leave my second firm, one of my partner mentors came into my office and looked at my wall and said, when I went on, he had started his own firm, in the 70s, I think. And he said, when I left my firm, the first thing I had to do was spend $20,000 to buy a set of books. You had to have them. And I said, yeah, I'm going to spend $200 on a Westlaw subscription. The technology is moving, legal technology is moving so quickly that is allowing small and medium firms to do all of the work that used to require large firms. And again, the energy to learn about those and the excitement to build those are coming from younger lawyers. And so very briefly, there are doc review platforms that used to cost, that are more effective, but are the equivalent of what used to cost $500,000 are now purchasable on monthly subscriptions. Billing and timing technology platforms, contract attorneys, these kind of both technological and kind of market developments allow our firms to act as if they are as big as they need to be. And as great as our partners are, they grew up in a particular kind of industry and technological environment, and we are able to help bridge these new ideas and abilities.
That's exactly right. And it happens even for me. We have a new associate that came on, and it was Westlaw. It was just a new add-on that I had no idea about. And I think earlier you had talked about your perception of mentorship as maybe being one-sided. This is how it can be, go both ways. I think I do that for my mentors sometimes, where I say, oh, there's a quicker way to do this. You can find this case a little bit easier if you did this. So Kayla, why don't you talk a little bit about that topic and how you have brought more to your firm as a young attorney and as the public interest fellow at KKC?
Right. I think what David talked about with technology is definitely the biggest thing. And it's not only directly just how to use new technology, but changes in technology mean, have all kinds of collateral effects, right? And I think especially the pandemic sped up all of this. Everything needed to become digital real fast where it wasn't already. And that means that communication changes completely. And we've talked a lot about on this panel already about how our job is all about communication, communication with the whistleblower, making sure that we're understanding their story and that then we can then turn around and package it correctly wherever it needs to go. And so with changing technology, the ways that we communicate with people change, and making sure that we can adequately communicate on a very human being basis. We talked a lot about how this job is about individual human beings, and with a couple screens in the way, that can be difficult. So making sure that we're still able to communicate with people on a very human being level, despite all the insane changing technology, I think is a big thing that we can bring. I also think that every new younger generation has a little bit more and more of a healthy distrust of established systems and a little bit more of a hunger for transparency. And I think that corresponds to more of a celebration of whistleblowers and a move away from the older stereotypes on whistleblowers and this field. And so I think our generation has a really healthy excitement about what whistleblowers have to bring, that kind of invigorates our work in a way that maybe the older generation didn't have.
And Kayla, you've mentioned a few times the word change, and I think that's kind of a central theme in this panel. Technologies are changing. The way the practice of law is handled is changing. The way that whistleblowers are coming forward and the avenues for them, they are all changing. But another thing that I am feeling is changing is the perception of whistleblowers. And Kayla, you also talked earlier about the negative stereotypes. Tell a brief story about my wife and I just recently bought a house in the spring, and you have to go to a closing when you purchase a home, and there's usually an attorney there, and I'm flipping through the contract pretending like I'm reading every line because I'm an attorney, and there's some pressures that go along with that. And we're having a conversation, and the closing attorney asked us what we did. And I said, "Oh, I'm a whistleblower attorney." And my realtor was there and said, "Oh, I didn't know that. What is that? What does that involve?" And the closing attorney kind of pipes in and says, well, essentially it's tattletale law, right? And I think it took every ounce of self-control for me to not leap out of the chair. And I think I felt my wife's hand quickly go on my knee to settle me down. Just one, it's inaccurate. It's a reductive way of looking at our field. And but it's something that we face. It's something that people in the public might think. And as we know, it couldn't be further from the truth. But David, why don't you talk first about what our generation is doing to break through that type of stereotype and educate the public on the importance of whistleblowers coming forward in the fight against fraud?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the younger, or our generation of lawyers, is doing is to some extent democratizing the concept of whistleblowers. So again, the people, our more senior partners and our colleagues, had done a lot of work around a certain kind of perceived whistleblower, right? So the CFO who knows of the fraud and comes forward, and they fought against the idea that that is disloyal and dishonest and hurtful. And as you have, one of the things I think is really exciting about younger lawyers is they are a more diverse racially and by gender and by background and by ability to, by something Kayla was saying, the way they communicate, the channels they communicate. They recognize that there are people who have valuable information in fighting against dishonesty and fraud, and that those people may not look like the very traditional whistleblower that helped some of the that was a whistleblower, was all whistleblower meant 20 years ago. And to see my colleagues who have different kinds of backgrounds and have met people in different kind of ways bring forth people who know about data and maybe that's what they know about, or people who are working at a lower level, or people who are working in different kind of industries than we traditionally thought of as whistleblower industries and different kind of roles, and are able with their different kinds of backgrounds to make more people feel comfortable bringing forward information in the fight against fraud is, I think, a really, really exciting thing. And I think it gets us to the place where this idea that those who see dangerous and fraudulent practices feel they have a moral obligation to make it right. I think that's a really exciting place to be.
I think so too. And when I'm explaining to my family or friends who might have the perception of, your tattletale or whatever, I always pause and kind of push back with the notion that, the majority of the time, the vast majority of the time, these people are trying to elevate the issue where they work first. And there's empirical data that substantiates that. And they're also risking a lot by coming forward. I mean, this isn't for nothing. Most of the time, my clients are still working in the same field. They're still running into the same people. They might even still work at the same company. So Kayla, we're going to kick this to you. What is your perception of younger attorneys and how we're working to kind of break the stereotypes that are out there about whistleblowers and the importance of them coming forward?
Yeah, well, your story, Matthew, about your real estate agent made me think of, every time someone asks me what I do and I say I'm in whistleblower litigation, and about 50% of the time, the response I get is, well, like for or against the whistleblower? And that's a ridiculous question for a lot of reasons. But I think it tends to be from older people that I get that question from, and from, a younger generation, my peers, it's a little more obvious what the answer to that question is. But I think there's more of an understanding in the younger generation that not only am I for the whistleblower, but it's not just for the whistleblower, it's for the public. What we do is we're not just here trying to get an individual person one reward for coming forward. That's obviously part of it, but that's not the whole picture. The whole picture is that this person is coming forward at all the great risks that we've discussed, not for themselves, but for the public. And so remembering that we are working for the public at large in this role and making sure that the systems in place are working for them the ways that they're supposed to be working. I think that's just more intuitively understood by the younger generation. That's what I've experienced, at least.
I think you're exactly right. And, I think we're also starting to see, in the media or, in entertainment, movies, TV shows, or at least I'm seeing kind of a shift, holding, whistleblowers up as more of a hero in a lot of cases. I think another distinction that at least I've been working on when I'm describing our field is, there are people who leak information, and we can get into the rights and wrongs of that. But the whistleblowers that we tend to represent, they're going through the right channels. They've again, like I've said, they've tried to escalate the issue before, with their firm or their company, and then they're coming forward and they're trying to go to the government in the ways, the channels that the government's created for them. So, we've got about 12 more minutes. I know we've got some questions. I see them kind of popping in here, but I wanted to ask David and Kayla, one more question before we go to the Q&A session. What is your specific commitment to whistleblowers and the field as the next generation of whistleblower attorneys? What if you could make a promise to your clients now and all your future clients and the whistleblowers that are out there, what would you say to them, David? Yeah,
what you were just saying made me think of, I actually have to brag for a moment. It made me think of one of my favorite clients who's apparently is watching right now because she just texted me.
Great, I love it.
But it made me think of this fact, which is including her, but every one of my clients has early on in a case said, if they'd only addressed this, I wouldn't be here. And then they always seem surprised when I say, I know. Everyone says that. And then when settlement gets talked about, their first question is always, how is this going to make sure the practice stops? It's never like, how much money am I going to get from this? Or what's the present value of the money I'm going to get? It is, how is this settlement going to ensure the safety or the like that people begin to do the right thing? And my partners used to, I think they still do, used to give a compliance talk to companies, so potential defendants. And the theme of the compliance talk was how to keep from ever having to deal with us. And that is my great dream, is that I would keep doing this until it becomes unnecessary. I find that it's more necessary, unfortunately, but helping people come forward to do the right thing and fix the industries and companies that they love is some of the most rewarding work I can imagine. And the only thing that would be better is if it became unnecessary.
Love that. Kayla, what about you?
Yeah, so going back to what you said, Matthew, when someone asked you, isn't that just tattletale law? I have started to think of it not even as whistleblower law, but as transparency law and accountability law. And so my promise that I try to keep in mind to my clients is that, we are on the same page. You are coming to me for transparency and for accountability. That's what you want, and that's also what I want. So we are on the same page with that always throughout the entire case. And I think that just reminding each individual who comes forward that what they are doing is absolutely crucial for transparency and accountability. There's just no other way to achieve those things without people who are willing to come forward. We try as a society to build these different systems for efficiency in healthcare and in government and in finance and all these things. But if we don't even know that those systems are working against us, we're not achieving anything. So just reminding these whistleblowers that there's no path to transparency and accountability without them, and that I'm on the same page as them in trying to achieve those things.
I love that. I love being on the same page. And, I think we all work with our clients to ensure that. And, from my perspective, going from the field of journalism, part of what attracted me to this field is the journey to truth and trying to, as they say, truth will out, trying to bring the truth to the surface. And the more that we do that, the more we chisel away at that endeavor, the less fraud there will be. So that's why I view it as valuable and something that, per Dave's comment, is going to be necessary, likely for a while, but the hope is that one day it's not. So we do have some comments and questions coming in from our audience. I'll take whoever wants to answer these, David or Kayla, you can jump in. But the first one is, why do you guys think that whistleblower firms tend to be on the smaller side?
So I have a theory. My theory is it's a much nicer way to practice law, and the people because most of our firms were founded by people who were, who'd worked in the government or had very good careers and were doing something they wanted to do. It's because by and large, they aggregated a bunch of lawyers they liked being with and got to the place where they were sort of happy with their partners. And so that's my sense.
What about you, Kayla? What's your take?
Yeah, I think, not to be repetitive of some of the things we've already touched on, but this field is so much about individual human beings and human stories and the risks that these individuals are putting themselves, the risks that they're taking and coming forward. And I think by nature, trying to accomplish that kind of law at a big, bureaucratic organization just kind of loses a lot of that human element. So I'm not sure if that's a conscious choice or just a natural outcome of practicing this type of law, but it is just about individual human being stories. And I think that trying to feel as a whistleblower like you're being treated as a human at, some kind of huge international firm is probably a lot more overwhelming and a lot less conducive to that end.
I think you're exactly right. So Kayla, we'll stick with you for this one, because I think you're newer to the field than David and myself. But what's one thing that surprised you about working with whistleblowers as clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think just about everything I've encountered has been a surprise because I knew, I'm not even exaggerating, nothing about this field when I started. And it's just been, I mean, such an interesting place to start. But I think one of the biggest things that has surprised me is the sheer number of whistleblowers who are coming forward every single day. I mean, it is such a risky, scary thing to do. And I guess sort of pessimistically, I thought that, you know, they're probably few and far between. But the number of brave individuals that I talk to every single day has been astoundingly high. And that's really, really encouraging. It means we need more lawyers in the field to be able to take on all of the clients that come forward, but it's been very inspiring and very encouraging for the future of the field to see, you know, obviously there's a pessimistic side that means that that's a lot of fraud going on in the background, but we'll focus on the positive that there are more people willing to come forward than I would have thought. And it's been really inspiring to see.
What about you, David?
I'm going to take the pessimistic side of that, which is the sheer brilliance in the number of ways there are to defraud government programs, and the fact that every program, every time there is any way to pay someone, there is someone out there who's figured out a way to exploit it. And I am always amazed by some program that I've never heard of that has some little quirk in the way it approves or pays, and that there is some company that has committed itself to defrauding, you know, to exploiting that. And I think that goes to the need for whistleblowers, because the government regulators, the people who set up these programs, were never thinking of this, you know, slight byway of the way that they pay in this particular, you know, consequence of the rule, but it is someone's job to, you know, there is a whole company devoted to exploiting that. And it is only someone at that company who would ever understand the way various things interact that, you know, that make this fraud. But that is what always amazes me.
Yeah, it does for me as well. And I mean, what we have to remember is, I mean, fraud's been around forever. I'm watching John Adams on HBO right now, which is just a fantastic miniseries. But, you know, when they were forming the government, Alexander Hamilton was talking about his theory of incurring debt, the country incurring debt and then being able to borrow. And Washington really pushed back and said, if you know someone's going to find a way to take advantage of this, you know that. And, of course, paraphrasing, but you know it's been around for a long time, and that's to me why the battle against it is so important. So I think we have time for one more. And I'm going to somewhat change the way they ask this, but you know, David, we'll stick with you for this one. Would the collaborative ever consider hiring a whistleblower or former whistleblower to help with investigatory work or consultative work? Where do you see the value in whistleblowers, you know, once their journey as a whistleblower has ended?
Yeah. Yes. We would, and I think we actually do. There are some former whistleblowers who do consultative work, and I believe we've worked with them, or at least strongly considered it. I mean, yes, we absolutely would. One of the things that I think about when I think about that is so much of as I've just alluded to, so much of these cases are so specific to the case that it becomes like, we need to find one of the 3 experts in this country on the way this interacts. I mean, if those people were also whistleblowers in those cases, 100%, yes.
All right, so Kayla, we're going to go to you. No question here, but just wanted to give you and David a chance to have a last word. So Kayla, we'll go to you first.
Sure. I just want to thank you both for this conversation. This has been really great. Really, it's, you know, because I do work in such a small firm, it's easy to think that this world is, you know, very, very narrow and very, very limited. And it's nice to speak to other people who have similar but different, you know, takes on things. And it's just been, you know, really fun for me. And I just want to thank all of the whistleblowers who are listening in. And, you know, without you, we wouldn't be able to do what we do every single day. And I'm just excited to keep working alongside each and every one of you moving forward and, you know, carrying on, as this panel is named, the legacy of all of our mentors.
David?
Similar to what Kayla said. Well, first let me say, Matt and Kayla, thank you for both today and like the times we've interacted as we planned for this panel. It's really been enjoyable for me. Unlike Matt, I can't see, I don't know if Matt can see who's watching this panel. Let me just say though, that as it's clear, one of the great things about what I get to do is talk to so many different people, lawyers and whistleblowers who are experts. And that doesn't just mean like in a professional capacity if they're my client. So whoever is watching, like if you have questions or ideas, whether you're a lawyer or a whistleblower and whether it's about a case or not, like feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk about this stuff at all times.
Yeah, so thank you so much, David and Kayla. I wanted to thank the National Whistleblower Center so much. They're an invaluable resource for whistleblowers and whistleblower attorneys alike. The majority of the reason for that is Siri Nelson, the director of the center. So thank you, Siri, and I think we're done.
Thank you, Siri. Thank you all.
Thank
Yeah,
you
thank you.
all. Your panel was so inspiring and informative. You just said everything and answered any question an early career whistleblower attorney or a law student might have about blowing the whistle, and also about representing whistleblowers and some of the challenges that we face. So I really appreciate you all speaking up and telling some really fun stories too.
No problem. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Siri.
Bye.